Picture a single bar of gold sitting in a vault. This bar was not born on Earth. Its atoms may have been forged when two dead stars collided, billions of years before our planet even existed. It survived the formation of Earth itself, centuries of human history, and countless changes of ownership. Melted, reshaped, traded, buried, rediscovered, melted again. Now its price has reached levels that seem almost impossible. Here's the strange part. Physics has been quietly warning us about gold's scarcity the entire time. Gold is element 79. It cannot be created by ordinary chemistry, not by melting another metal, not by mixing chemicals, not by any clever trick a chemist could pull off in a lab. Its atoms were forged in genuinely rare cosmic violence, most likely when two neutron stars collided in the distant universe. On Earth, its average concentration in the crust is only a few parts per billion. And once mined, it doesn't rust, doesn't rot, doesn't disappear. That means every single financial panic in human history has been competing for a supply that nature simply cannot quickly expand. Humans create the fear, markets create the price. Physics controls the inventory. Let's find out exactly what that means. Before we go further, let's be precise about the claim in this title, the same way we are precise about every claim on this channel. Physics did not forecast the exact date of gold's record price, and it certainly didn't forecast the exact dollar figure on a trading screen. Anyone claiming physics can do that is overselling what these tools actually deliver. What physics genuinely predicted is something more fundamental and honestly more interesting. Gold is chemically difficult to destroy, extremely rare in Earth's accessible crust, almost impossible to manufacture economically, and slow to replace once demand suddenly rises. Here's the sentence that captures the entire thesis of this video. Human fear moves the price, physics limits the supply. Those are two completely different mechanisms operating on two completely different timescales. And understanding the gap between them is going to explain almost everything strange about how gold actually behaves. Let's start with the most fundamental fact of all, the one sitting at the very bottom of everything else in this video. Gold is element 79 on the periodic table. Every single gold atom, without exception, contains exactly 79 protons in its nucleus. That number isn't arbitrary. It's the entire identity of the element. Change that number even slightly, and you no longer have gold. You have something else entirely. Here's what that means in practice. You cannot create gold through ordinary chemistry, not by melting another metal down, not by mixing chemicals together in clever combinations, not by refining copper more aggressively, not by applying extreme pressure, not by combining silver and mercury, despite what centuries of alchemists desperately hoped to turn any other element into gold. You would need to physically change its atomic nucleus, genuine nuclear transmutation, requiring nuclear reactions, particle accelerators, or radioactive decay processes. And critically, the energy and equipment required to pull that off would cost dramatically more than the gold you'd actually produce. This is the first genuinely dramatic idea in this entire story. Gold isn't expensive because it's difficult to polish, or because of clever marketing, or because of tradition alone. It's expensive because nature simply doesn't offer any cheap chemical shortcut for making more of it. The scarcity isn't a human invention, it's baked into the periodic table itself. Here's where the story gets genuinely spectacular, and it connects gold directly to some of the most extreme events in the entire universe. Gold is heavier than iron, which means it cannot be produced through the ordinary nuclear fusion processes that power most stars throughout their normal lives. Stars like our sun fuse light elements into heavier ones, but that process runs out of steam well before it can build something as heavy as gold. The leading scientific explanation is that much of the universe's gold was created through something called the rapid neutron capture process, or the R process, a nuclear reaction that only happens under conditions of genuinely extreme cosmic violence. Neutron-star mergers appear to be one of their primary sources. In 2017, astronomers directly observed a neutron-star merger called GW 1708117. And that observation provided direct physical evidence that heavy elements really were being created in the radioactive debris of exactly this kind of collision. Researchers estimated that a single event like this produced at least several Earth masses worth of gold and other heavy metals flung outward into space. That gives us a genuinely spectacular way to think about jewelry sitting in a drawer somewhere. The gold in a wedding ring may have been created when two dead stars collided billions of years ago, long before our solar system even formed. Gold isn't rare because the universe is somehow bad at making it. It's rare because the specific events capable of making it are extraordinarily uncommon, scattered thinly across cosmic history. Let's bring this story back down to Earth. Because the same scarcity logic that operates at a cosmic scale shows up again in a completely different form, right here on our own planet. The average concentration of gold in Earth's crust is approximately 4 parts per billion. In practical terms, ordinary rock contains almost none of it. Gold isn't difficult to obtain because it doesn't exist. It's difficult to obtain because it's spread incredibly thinly through enormous quantities of rock. And it often sits in deposits where extraction is genuinely expensive, technically demanding, or simply not economically worthwhile at current prices. This creates an important distinction worth holding on to: geological existence versus economic availability. Gold being present somewhere in the crust is a completely different fact from gold being extractable at a profit. When the gold price rises, previously uneconomic deposits can suddenly become financially viable to mine. But mines cannot respond to that opportunity instantly. Exploration takes years, permits take years, financing takes time to arrange, construction takes years more. Only after all of that does actual production begin. A high price does not create a new mine overnight. Physics, through the sheer physical difficulty and time cost of extraction, gives the entire market a built in delay that no amount of investor enthusiasm can shorten. Here's a property of gold that sounds almost mundane at first, but turns out to be genuinely central to its entire economic role throughout history. Gold is remarkably resistant to corrosion and oxidation. It doesn't rust the way iron does. It doesn't tarnish easily the way silver does. That creates a genuinely unique economic property. A gold coin buried for centuries can be dug up still recognizable. Jewelry can be melted down and reused indefinitely without meaningful loss. Bullion can move from an ancient temple to a private bank to a modern central bank vault, remaining fundamentally the same physical substance the entire time. The World Gold Council estimates that approximately 219,891 tons of gold had been mined throughout all of human history by the end of 2025. And remarkably, most of the gold ever mined still exists in some recoverable form today. This means gold supply isn't purely a story about new mining, it's also fundamentally a stock system. Old jewelry, old coins, and old bars can all flow back into the market whenever prices rise high enough to convince their owners to sell. But that same durability creates a genuine paradox worth sitting with. Nearly all the gold ever mined throughout human history still physically exists somewhere, and yet owners frequently refuse to sell it precisely during the moments they're most afraid. Gold can be physically abundant, sitting quietly in millions of vaults and jewelry boxes worldwide, while remaining economically unavailable exactly when demand for it spikes hardest. Here's a physical property that turns out to be genuinely inseparable from gold's entire monetary history. Gold has a density of approximately 19.3 grams per cubic centimeter, remarkably dense for a metal. That's precisely why a surprisingly small physical object can represent an enormous amount of value. A person can transport a genuinely significant fortune inside a suitcase, hidden in a necklace, or carried as a handful of coins in a pocket. This single physical property helped gold survive across an extraordinary range of human history. Ancient trade routes, imperial taxation systems, wars, currency collapses, banking crises, capital controls, and political revolutions. The density of gold isn't merely a scientific curiosity worth mentioning in passing. It's genuinely a financial technology in its own right. Gold compresses enormous wealth into a form that's difficult to destroy and relatively easy to physically move. Exactly the properties you'd want from money if you expected the surrounding political and financial systems to occasionally fail. Here's a genuinely counterintuitive idea worth sitting with because it inverts how we normally think about what makes something valuable. Gold is genuinely useful in electronics and aerospace applications because it conducts electricity well and resists corrosion. But the overwhelming majority of global demand for gold remains connected to jewelry, investment, bars, coins, and central bank reserves, not industrial consumption. Its unusual economic strength comes partly from the fact that it isn't rapidly consumed the way most valuable materials are. When gold gets used in jewelry, it typically remains recoverable, meltable, and reusable rather than being destroyed in the process. Copper gets heavily consumed in construction and wiring. Oil gets burned and is gone forever. Food disappears the moment it's eaten. Gold, by contrast, mostly just moves from one owner to another, over and over, essentially forever. This single distinction means gold behaves less like an ordinary industrial commodity and considerably more like a long duration monetary asset, a store of value rather than a material that gets used up. Here's the first genuinely underappreciated fact worth digging into in real detail. World Gold Council data shows total gold supply reached approximately 5,002 tons in 2025, including roughly 3,672 tons of new mine production. That total mine output was only about 1% higher than the previous year, even during a period of dramatically rising prices. Think about how strange that actually is. A price can rise by 30% in a year, while mine output rises only slightly. Why does that gap exist? Mines require genuinely long development periods before they can produce anything. Ore grades vary enormously from deposit to deposit. New deposits are increasingly difficult to locate and access. Environmental approvals take real time to secure. Energy and labor costs shift constantly, and existing mines gradually decline in output as they get exhausted over time. Economists call this inelastic supply. The market can create more paper claims on gold almost instantly, but it genuinely cannot create thousands of tons of new physical metal on anything resembling that same time scale. Here's a fact that seems at first glance to completely undermine the entire scarcity argument this video has been building. The World Gold Council estimates total above ground gold at roughly 219,891 tons as of the end of 2025. At first glance, that seems like an enormous amount. If so much gold already exists in the world, why should scarcity drive the price at all? Because that above ground stock is divided among jewelry, central bank reserves, private bars and coins, industrial inventories, museums and religious institutions, family savings, and long term investment holdings. A gold necklace in a household in India, a temple donation collected over generations, or a central bank's strategic reserve may technically count as part of the global supply figure, but it may not enter the actual market at any price most people would consider reasonable. Gold's scarcity, in other words, isn't purely geological anymore. Once you account for how it's actually held, it's genuinely behavioral. Here is a genuinely fascinating contradiction, and it's one of the strangest patterns in this entire story. Normally, when a price rises sharply, that encourages producers to sell more of whatever they're producing. Gold jewelry behaves differently. When gold prices rise sharply, families frequently postpone weddings or scale back the size of jewelry purchases. Consumers increasingly exchange old jewelry rather than buying new metal outright. Buyers shift from heavy, elaborate ornaments toward lighter, less metal intensive designs. The World Gold Council reported that global investment demand for gold reached a record level in 2025, while jewelry demand weakened considerably over the same period. Chinese jewelry demand specifically fell to its lowest level since 2009. That's a genuinely fascinating contradiction worth sitting with. Gold becomes more attractive as a financial investment at precisely the same moment it becomes less affordable as jewelry, the two forms of demand moving in opposite directions simultaneously. Here's a detail connecting the physics directly to genuine high level geopolitics. Central banks don't buy gold because it produces interest. Gold doesn't pay a coupon the way a government bond does. They buy it for a different reason entirely. Gold has no private issuer. It cannot be printed into existence by another government. It carries no default risk in the way a bond theoretically can. It diversifies foreign exchange reserves. And it tends to remain valuable specifically when confidence in ordinary currencies starts to decline. The World Gold Council reported that central banks purchased approximately 863 tons of gold in 2025, a historically high level, even though it fell somewhat below the truly extraordinary purchasing seen in the immediately preceding years. Here's the deeper line worth remembering. Central banks aren't simply buying a metal. They are buying an asset that doesn't carry another country's promise to pay, a genuinely different category of financial security than almost anything else available to them. Here's a mechanism explaining why gold's price can move, even when there's no physical shortage happening anywhere near a jewelry counter. Gold generates no natural yield. It doesn't pay interest the way a savings account or a bond does. When government bond yields are high, holding gold instead becomes relatively less attractive because investors could simply earn income elsewhere instead. But when interest rates fall, when inflation fears rise, or when real yields become genuinely unattractive after accounting for inflation, the opportunity cost of holding gold declines correspondingly, making it comparatively more appealing. This is precisely why gold's price can rise even when there's no physical shortage whatsoever at any jewelry shop anywhere in the world. The price is, in a very real sense, a constant contest between several competing forces. The return available from safe government bonds, the expected future loss of purchasing power from inflation, the risk of currency depreciation, and the insurance value of holding an asset that sits entirely outside the ordinary banking system. Here's a genuinely important nuance, and it deserves careful, honest handling. A large amount of gold trading today happens through financial instruments rather than physical bars, futures contracts, exchange traded funds, unallocated accounts, options, swaps, and various over the counter contracts. Many of these instruments represent financial exposure to gold's price without requiring any immediate delivery of an actual physical bar. This creates a genuine distinction worth understanding clearly. Gold ownership itself, a claim linked to gold's price, and a promise to deliver gold at some point in the future are three meaningfully different things. In calm markets, these different forms of gold tend to trade as though they are essentially equivalent. During a genuine crisis, investors can suddenly start caring a great deal about the difference. Here's a useful way to frame it. The market can create 1,000 financial claims on a single bar. Physics allows only one actual bar to exist. To be genuinely fair here, this isn't a claim that paper gold is fraudulent. These instruments serve legitimate trading and hedging purposes for countless market participants. The important issue is simply that financial claims on gold can grow considerably faster than the physical supply of gold itself ever could. Here's one more piece of the supply puzzle, and it comes with a genuinely important limitation attached. Gold recycling represents a major real source of supply. Rising prices encourage people to sell broken jewelry, old coins, industrial scrap, dental gold, and household ornaments that might otherwise sit untouched for decades. But owners frequently treat gold as a form of emergency savings, only willing to sell when they urgently need cash or when the price becomes exceptionally undeniably attractive. So, recycling behaves partly like a genuine reserve valve on the whole system. As the price rises, more owners become willing to sell, and additional supply enters the market as a result. But that additional supply still ultimately depends on human fear, income pressure, and confidence, meaning it's genuinely reactive to psychology, not a purely mechanical response to price alone. Here's arguably the single most important property tying this entire story together into one coherent political and economic thread. Governments can create currency, they can issue bonds, they can generate digital balances, extend credit, provide liquidity, and stand up emergency lending facilities essentially at will. What they categorically cannot do is create new gold through a central bank announcement. That single hard physical limitation is exactly why gold becomes politically attractive during periods of currency instability, sanctions, war, sovereign debt anxiety, banking stress, or broader geopolitical fragmentation. Gold simply isn't controlled by any single nation's central bank, a genuinely rare property in the modern financial world. Let's bring the entire story back together into one unified thread. The exact same property that makes gold rare in astrophysics is what makes it powerful in human finance. Gold requires genuinely rare cosmic events to form in the first place. Once present on Earth, it's difficult to locate and expensive to extract. Once mined, it survives almost indefinitely without meaningful degradation. Gold's entire monetary history, in other words, is built on an unbroken chain of physical facts created in rare cosmic violence, scarce within Earth's accessible crust, difficult to manufacture artificially, resistant to corrosion, easily divided and recombined, dense and genuinely portable, and recognizable across countless human generations. Human culture layered symbolism, ritual, and meaning on top of all of that. But physics supplied the underlying foundation. The entire structure was built upon. So here's what I want you to actually walk away with today. Physics did not predict the exact date or the exact price of gold's record high. What it predicted, decades and even centuries in advance, was something considerably more durable. That gold's fundamental scarcity, cosmic, geological, and chemical all at once, would keep colliding with human fear during exactly the moments fear runs highest, and that collision would keep producing dramatic price movements over and over indefinitely. Human fear determines precisely when people rush to buy gold. Physical law determines how quickly the supply of gold can possibly respond to that rush. Those two timescales rarely match, and that mismatch is where gold's entire price history actually lives. If you've been with this channel for a while, this video should feel like a genuine companion piece to one you've already seen. Remember our Bitcoin video, where we explored the idea that Bitcoin represents the first monetary system in human history whose scarcity is enforced directly by energy and cryptographic proof rather than by geology or government decree. Gold is the other half of that comparison. Scarcity enforced by geology, by nuclear astrophysics, and by the sheer physical difficulty of extraction, refined and tested across thousands of years of human history rather than mere decades. Two completely different physical mechanisms, arriving at a remarkably similar economic role, an asset that no government and no amount of clever financial engineering can simply manufacture into existence on demand. The gold bar sitting in that vault was never really just a financial instrument. It was cosmic debris, forged in violence billions of years before human beings existed, patiently waiting in the Earth's crust for someone to dig it up, precisely because nature made more of it genuinely, permanently difficult to create. Humans create the fear, markets create the price, physics controls the inventory, and it always has. If this kind of thinking, where physics quietly explains the parts of finance nobody else is willing to explain, is why you're here. Subscribe. New videos every week breaking down the hidden math behind money. See you in the next one.